All right. Hi, my name is Stephen Walther. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I'm going to start by sharing a dream of mine with you. So I've always had this dream of building the perfect web application. And tonight, I'm going to talk about the application part of that dream. What I've always wanted to do is I wanted to be able to build a web application that has the same level of interactivity, responsiveness, all the stuff that you get in a traditional desktop application. Now, you could do that in the past. It took some work. You had to, write a lot of JavaScript, rely on different frameworks. You could accomplish a lot of that toward building, a truly interactive web application, but it was hard. What I'm going to show you tonight is I'm going to show you how you can use jQuery in combination with ASP.NET AJAX to build what I call pure client-side AJAX applications, to build, real AJAX applications that present the same level of interactivity and responsiveness that we expect from a desktop application. So I have one main thesis tonight. My one main thesis, that's not it. There it is. My main thesis tonight that I'm going to try to prove to you by the end of this talk is that jQuery, when used in combination with ASP.NET AJAX, enables you to create a type of application that was, not impossible to create before, but that was difficult to create before. It allows you to build pure AJAX applications. So I need to say a little more about what I mean by a pure AJAX application. So let me give you a little bit of context around that. There are three basic types of web applications that you might want to build. You might be interested in building a pure server-side application, right? If you're building an ASP.NET, I'm assuming all you guys are, ASP.NET developers. Traditionally, you use ASP.NET to generate pages on the server and then render those pages out to the browser. The advantage of building pure server applications are that they're completely dependable, right? You control the domain where they're generated. You know they'll work on all browsers. You can have faith that they'll work no matter what you throw at them because all the browser's doing is just, interpreting some HTML and just sitting there and taking content and showing it. Nothing exciting. Now, I'm not going to talk about that type of application tonight. You can use jQuery, of course, with a server-side application to, spice it up and make it more interesting. But that's not what I'm interested in talking about tonight. You can also create a second type of application that I'm going to call an AJA application. That's asynchronous JavaScript and HTML. And in that type of application, what you're doing is you're still generating all of your UI. You're generating your pages on the server, and you're pushing out your pages to the browser. But you're using AJAX. You're starting to use AJAX not to do postbacks, but to do sneaky postbacks back to the server to be able to grab more information and update the page. The critical portion of what makes an AJA application an AJA application is that you're passing fragments of HTML from the server to the client. So you're passing HTML back and forth, and that's how you're updating the client. So an AJA application, Microsoft has a great story here. We have something called the Update Panel that allows you to very easily take a pure server-side application and add AJAX functionality to it. That's a very useful type of application. I'm also not going to be talking about that type of application tonight. I want to focus on this third type of application, the type of application that was somewhat difficult to write before, a type of application that requires that you write some JavaScript. The third type of application that I want to talk about tonight is a pure AJAX application. And what makes a pure AJAX application different, and what I think makes it so cool, is that when you're building a pure AJAX application, you're only passing the critical data that you need to be able to update the page. So if you want to show, say, a grid of data, you're showing a grid of database data, instead of passing a fragment of HTML that has table tags, TR tags, TD tags, the only thing that you're passing from the server to the client is the pure data, the list of records from the database. And then you allow the client to render the UI. So the big advantage of writing pure client-side applications is that you get all these advantages here. First of all, a pure client-side application doesn't require as many postbacks. There's a, if you're in certain situations, you could get away with no postbacks at all. You could serve one page out and do all your updates to the page by just doing AJAX calls back to the server. So you don't have to, unlike a pure server-side application where every time you want to take some significant action in the page, you have to click a button, the whole page has to post back to the server, and then you have to re-render the server. In a pure AJAX application, in a lot of cases, you can just, you can just do an AJAX call in the background and pull the data back. Another big advantage of working with pure AJAX applications is that they require less bandwidth, right? You're not passing the whole table over. You're not passing all the table tags and the TR tags and all that stuff over. You're just passing the pure data back and forth. So it requires less bandwidth. It requires less network traffic to be able to update a page. A pure AJAX application can also mean less work on the web server. So you have to do less work on the web server. Think about it like this. Let's say that you're building, a typical ASP.NET page, and you have different regions in the page where you're showing. You might have grabbed some data from, one database table to show up at the top right of the page. You might have had to do some calculation to show some other data in the page. Typically you have a lot of stuff going on in a page. Many of the things need to access the database to be able to generate that page. If you're building a pure client-side application, what you can do is instead of having to post the whole page back every time and go out to the database every time to recalculate all those different regions in the page, you can just update the one region of the page. So that means that it's less work not only on your web server, but potentially on your database server. You're only updating the region that really needs to be updated rather than going crazy and updating the whole page each and every time you're taking some sort of action on the page. And finally, a pure AJAX application can be much more responsive. So in many cases, there's really no good reason to go back to the server at all, right? I mean, let's say that you're doing client-side sorting. You just want to take some database records in a grid view. You want to, click on the different columns, and you want to sort by the different columns. There's no reason, as long as you don't need to fetch more data, to go back to the server. And so it could be super responsive in that case. Or, you're doing client-side filtering. So anyway, so the goal tonight is to show you how you can build these pure AJAX applications by taking advantage of both jQuery and the new features in Microsoft AJAX. All right, so let me give you a general overview of the 4 parts of this talk I'm giving tonight. So the first part of the talk, what I want to talk about is how jQuery fits in to the overall Microsoft AJAX vision, so how it fits in with the ASP.NET AJAX framework. Then I want to give a lightning quick overview of jQuery. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have been or are using jQuery right now? How many of you have used it? So I don't want to spend too much time on that because most of you have had some experience working. Can you put your hands up one more time? Sorry, okay, very cool. Okay, so just out of curiosity, how many of you are using the AJAX Control Toolkit? Wow. I would say the AJAX Control Toolkit is a little more than jQuery. Anyway, that's interesting. So I don't want to spend too much time on an overview of jQuery, but I do want to give, for those of you who haven't been exposed to it before, you'll be very happy to know that you can understand, most of jQuery. I'll give you a pretty good understanding by the time you leave today. It's a really simple but powerful framework. So you should be able to learn enough to start using it after this session. Oh, I forgot my favorite part of the talk. All right, so my favorite part of the talk is I'm going to show you how to build 2 sample applications using jQuery and ASP.NET AJAX. These are, of course, they need to be demoed, so they're extremely simple applications. But I want to show you one sample of a web forms application. We're going to create a photo gallery application. And then I'm going to show you a second sample that's more, business-like. I'm going to show you a, kind of movie database application. I'm going to show you how you can build a pure, sort of client-side movie database application that also supports, failover in case people don't have JavaScript enabled. So it works on both server-side and client-side stuff. All right. One thing that I really want to emphasize from the very beginning, because I've seen there's been some confusion on this, is that Microsoft is not, it's not like Microsoft has adopted jQuery and they're abandoning the existing Microsoft Ajax framework. One of the things I want to show you tonight, and I think the demonstrations will show you this, is that Microsoft Ajax, the existing framework, works very well with jQuery. They both have different strengths, and you can't do everything that you need to do with jQuery, and there's certain things that jQuery brings to the table that you can, that you still need Microsoft Ajax for. In particular, there are some things that ASP.NET Ajax does very well that jQuery doesn't do as well. For example, ASP.NET Ajax is really great at interacting with web services, at doing Ajax requests back to web services, whether you're talking about a WCF service or an ASMX service. If you've ever worked with that before, it's a beautiful thing, right? If you want to call a web service, all you have to do is you just add a service reference, you get this automatic IntelliSense for your proxy classes, and you just call back to it. It makes it extremely simple and extremely easy to do. So I'll show you a demonstration of that shortly. That's one thing ASP.NET Ajax is good at. Another thing that's really good at is creating client-side components and controls, what you might call Ajax controls and components. The ASP.NET Ajax framework allows you to build controls that purely JavaScript controls that run purely on the client side. And the really interesting thing that we're getting, some of the new features in ASP.NET Ajax, is we're getting declarative client-side controls. So I'm really excited about that. In fact, I'm going to show you a simple sample of using a data view control, a client-side data view control, which is pretty cool. The other thing, now I have to tell you, this is my favorite new feature of ASP.NET Ajax. It makes a huge difference to the way I build applications now, and that's client templates. Have you guys seen that yet? Have you seen, well, I think you've seen a little bit of it in earlier talks, but I'll be showing you some of that tonight, and Bertrand has a talk where he really drills down into it on Thursday, right? What's the number for the talk, do you know? Oh, okay. Yeah, tell me in a second. So there's PC 32. So if you really want to drill down into the client templates, there's a talk later this week on Thursday just focuses on the client template stuff. But I'll show it in passing to show how it works with jQuery. Okay, so what does client templates do? It allows you, when you grab data out by, let's say you call a web service and you get some JSON data out, what you can do is you can use a client template. It's just a fragment of HTML in your page, just a fragment of HTML in your document to template each of the data items that you're getting back from the server. So it's great if you want to display a grid of data as each data item comes in, just like, for example, in a repeater control, where you can have a template in that and use that to template each of your data items. You can now do this on the client side. So that's very cool stuff. Finally, I can't talk about the ASP.NET Ajax Control Toolkit without I can't talk about ASP.NET Ajax without mentioning the Control Toolkit. We've already found out that it looks like just about everyone in this room has used it, which is great. If you haven't used it, it's 30+ controls that allow you to do also, things like create autocomplete text boxes, filter text boxes, modal pop-ups. It allows you to, it's a set of server controls that you can use in an ASP.NET application. It's also, recently Microsoft released a client-only version of it, so you can also use it even without using the server-side controls. So there's a lot of great functionality in that, well, 30-some pieces of functionality that you can use in your applications. Okay, so that's what ASP.NET Ajax brings to the table. That's what you get by using the ASP.NET Ajax part of the framework. jQuery also brings certain things to the table. That's why it's exciting. It's in the framework now. One of the things that jQuery does very well that Microsoft Ajax doesn't do well is it provides you with a selector syntax. Now, if you're not familiar with selectors, you already know how to use selectors. It's the same thing as, as selector rules and cascading style sheets. I'll show you some samples of that in a moment. But selectors allow you to go out to a document, grab elements from the document, and once you have that collection of elements, then you can start doing something with it. So it's a great syntax for grabbing elements out of the DOM and manipulating them. Another thing that jQuery does very well is it has a nice animation framework. So it has a basic animation framework. I'll show you that in a moment. Now, you might be thinking, well, I'm a developer, I'm not a designer, I don't care about animation. But one thing that you quickly run into when you're building pure AJAX applications is you don't have, since you're not doing as many postbacks to the server anymore, you don't have a little progress bar showing progress as you're actually, posting information back to the server. You need alternative ways of showing action happening in the background. And one really great way of doing that is to throw in some animations to show that the browser hasn't just frozen when you're doing an AJAX call and it's actually doing something nice in the background. So it's nice that jQuery brings that in. Finally, and I think this is my favorite feature of jQuery, it has a huge ecosystem of plugins. It has all sorts of really great plugins, and I'll be showing you some of these plugins later on tonight. But it has a very, very passionate developer community that have developed a lot of extensions for the jQuery language. All right, so some quick and necessary bullet points on jQuery. jQuery was created by John Resig. I first came across John Resig because he wrote a really great JavaScript book. I had read his JavaScript book a while ago. One of the first books to really take JavaScript seriously as a programming language. He really dived into the details of it. He created jQuery about 2 years ago in 2006. It really took off after he created it. He's always licensed it under an open source license. It's dual licensed under MIT and the GPL license. If you're familiar with open source licenses, then you know that MIT is one of the least restrictive of the open source licenses, so you can use it in commercial and non-commercial applications and modify it. So it's a very non-restrictive license. jQuery has a high level of cross-browser compatibility. That means that if it's a browser that was, thrown out in the world sometime after the change of the millennia, it probably will work with jQuery. So, any recent version of IE, Firefox, Safari will work. I even tried all my samples I'm showing you tonight on Chrome, just to, make sure that they work. And since jQuery was written using feature detection, it was written against, standards, it just works fine. Even though Chrome isn't even listed as an officially supported browser, it still works. jQuery has an extremely small footprint. This is important because this is when you're building an AJAX application, you don't want someone to come to your website and then have to wait 5 minutes for your massive JavaScript library to download into the browser. So jQuery, the minified version, the version where all the spaces have been extracted and the variable names have been reduced, is only about 15,000 bytes. That's smaller than most images you have in a web page. So we're talking a very, very small framework, just the minimal amount you need to sort of get off the ground. It's already trusted by a number of major websites, including NBC, Netflix. A lot of websites are already using it and depending on it. And finally, again, I can't emphasize this enough, it has a very passionate developer community around it. It has very active discussion lists. It's a growing project. People are always contributing to it. And, obviously, Microsoft is one of the growing members of this project now as well. So how does jQuery fit in with Microsoft? Well, Microsoft has made certain commitments around jQuery. This is kind of new territory for Microsoft. The first commitment is Microsoft is committing to not fork jQuery. This is very important. It's not like we're going to take jQuery and then create a Microsoft version of jQuery and then distribute that with Visual Studio. We're distributing the same version of jQuery as you can download from jQuery.com. So you won't have to, program against the Microsoft version versus, the John Resig version, the official jQuery.com version. There'll just be one version of jQuery. We're releasing it under the MIT license, so you can use it in commercial, non-commercial, all your projects. But this is an important point. We're also going to actively contribute back to the community here. We're going to keep contributing to jQuery. jQuery is something that we're really excited about. It's a framework that we want to, nurture and contribute to. But we want to contribute to it just like any other community member. We want to, we're going to go through the same process. We're going to, go ahead and submit things in the same way as everyone else to try to contribute in the same way as other members of the community. But this point is really important because I keep running into this when talking about open source software with companies where the response is, well, we'd love to use the open source software, but you know what? We can't really use it unless there's some kind of product support for it. So this is a really interesting thing that we've done here. We're offering full product support for jQuery, just like for any other Microsoft product. That's huge because that means that you can treat it like any other Microsoft product when you're developing applications in your company. The significant thing of that is, it's Christmas Eve, it's 2 a.m., something goes wrong with your website. You need to pick up the phone and yell at someone. What you can do is you can pick up the phone, you can dial Microsoft Product Support Services, and you can get product support, in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve. You can get a support ticket open, and you can get some action done on it. So that's great. We're going to treat it just like any other Microsoft product. We're integrating jQuery into all future versions of Visual Studio. If you've been programming with ASP.NET MVC, how many people are using MVC? Just out of curiosity. That's a pretty big percentage in there. So if you've been working with MVC, you will have noticed that about 2 weeks ago, the beta 1 of MVC came out. And in the scripts folder, right along the ASP.NET AJAX JavaScript library, you get jQuery. It's sitting there right next to the Microsoft just right next to the Microsoft AJAX library stuff. So it's already shipping, and it's going to ship for web forms in the next version of Visual Studio. Finally, this is something that was just posted as of yesterday. There's now an annotated version of the jQuery file that you can download from jQuery.com right now. And what that does is it gives you full IntelliSense. If you went to Scott Guthrie's keynote demonstration of that this morning, then you saw that when you now when you use jQuery, if you're typing along, inside of a document, you get full IntelliSense for your jQuery stuff. So you get descriptions of your parameters and all that while you're working with jQuery within Visual Studio. So this means you can use jQuery in this same way as you'd use JavaScript, or for that matter, C# or VB.NET. You can use the languages in the same way with the IntelliSense. What this means is if for some crazy reason you don't want to use Visual Studio to build ASP.NET applications, it still means that Visual Studio is a fantastic environment for just generating like HTML and JavaScript applications. It's a really great development environment now for building JavaScript files. All right, so now we're going to move on to the second part of the talk. The second part of the talk, I want to just give you a basic overview of the language for those of you who haven't worked with jQuery before. jQuery was really, it was created to address two pain points that JavaScript developers are always running into. When you're building JavaScript applications, one problem you always run into is it's difficult to select out certain elements in the document. There's not really a good syntax for doing that. You can use getElement by ID, you can use getElements by tag names, but that's about it. So beyond that, you have to start writing some JavaScript code. The innovation that jQuery brought here was to take the same selector syntax that all of you guys already know from working with cascading style sheets, that very same syntax, and porting it from the world of styles over to the world of behavior. So that's what's going on here. jQuery is taking a familiar syntax from the style world and allowing you to apply it to JavaScript, to add behaviors to elements, so apply it to the rest of the JavaScript world. So that's one pain point that jQuery takes care of. The other thing that you always run into as a JavaScript developer is any good JavaScript developer knows to avoid going out to the DOM unnecessarily often. The reason for that is grabbing elements from the DOM is always a slow operation, right? It's never a particularly fast operation, so you always want to cache it in some way. So the other innovation that jQuery brings in is this idea of chaining. That once you've grabbed out a whole bunch of elements, you don't have to keep grabbing them again each time you want to do an operation on it. What you can do is grab that, that set of elements once and then do a series of operations on that set. And I'll show you some samples of that coming up. So it allows you to write more efficient JavaScript code in a very natural manner. All right, so I have some samples here, some standard jQuery selectors. Let me start with the one on the top. One on the top, the pound first name one, that should just look like CSS to you, right? That's how in CSS you would pick out one element with a certain ID in the document and do something with it. So it works the same way as in jQuery. Second example is a little more interesting. If you work with pseudo attributes in CSS, this is kind of like the :visited thing if you're working in CSS. What that does is that automatically pulls out every element that's an input type equals text tag. So that's not really part of the CSS standard, but say it's something that's like CSS where jQuery has extended what you can do in standard CSS. Then the third example, the dot required, should look very much like a CSS class, right? It looks very much like working with a standard CSS class. Again, it's just a selector in jQuery that works the same way as in CSS. And finally, the last one's really interesting. They have something like this in the CSS3 standard, but the syntax is a little different. What this does, though I don't think any browser supports that syntax yet, but what this one does is it allows you to grab out an element in the page named grid, an HTML table, and then apply some sort of operation on every other row in the grid. So let me show you some samples of that. I'm going to show you some sample code. All right. So I'm going to start with a really simple sample here. First thing I should show you is, how do you start using jQuery? This is a web forms application, so obviously it's not shipping with jQuery right now. If you want to use jQuery in a web forms application, go out to jQuery.com, download, both the minified and the larger version of the file, stick it into a folder in your application, and then what you have to do is you can use the standard script manager control, which you should all be familiar with if you worked with ASP.NET AJAX in your applications. The script manager, by default, adds in the Microsoft AJAX library, so you get that automatically. But what this is also doing is adding a script reference to the jQuery library. So that's all you have to do. I'm just giving the path that's going, injected into the page. So now I'm all set to start using jQuery here. Now you'll notice at the top of the page, I have a script block, and inside that script block, I have a page load function. And that page load function, that's actually coming from the Microsoft AJAX library. That page load function fires off once the document is ready, once all the elements have been loaded up, fires off earlier than the normal Windows on load event, which waits until all the images are also loaded. So I'm using that to go ahead and start using to start using jQuery in the page. And you'll notice that I have my jQuery selector right here. And what it's doing is it's grabbing out every input type equals text box in the page, and it's changing the background color of any input type equals text box in the page to yellow right there. So the input type equals text boxes in the page, if you scroll down, you'll notice that this just has standard ASP.NET controls. Nothing fancy. Here's a text box, and here's another text box. Might as well show both of them. So just two standard ASP.NET text box controls. At the end of the day, all an ASP.NET control does is it just renders out HTML. In this case, they're rendering out input type equals text. So as you might expect, when I run this page, I get two yellow text boxes. And there we go. So it ran the jQuery, we got our yellow text boxes. Now, you might be saying to yourself right about now that, hey, I could do the exact same thing using CSS. And this just looks like an extremely inefficient way of doing the same thing I could do by just putting in a style sheet in the page. Because, right, I could put a CSS class on all my input tag, in all my text box tags and just put a style rule at the top and get the same result as I just did. And that's true, but the interesting thing that you get from jQuery is what you can do is not only use jQuery selectors to modify the style of elements, you can also use jQuery selectors to add things like event handlers or to actually change the structure of the document. So you can go beyond what you can do using styles. One other thing I should point out here as well, though, is another nice thing that jQuery gives you is it gives you an automatic compatibility layer across browsers, even for things like styles. So in certain situations, which I'll show you in a moment, certain situations, even the ability to change the style of elements is pretty cool because there's not complete compatibility for style sheets across different browsers. All right, so I want to show you a slightly more complicated example of using jQuery. In this file, I have my page load function. What I'm doing is I'm grabbing all the elements of the page that have a CSS class name of required, and what I'm doing is I'm adding a onFocus handler. So I'm adding an event handler so that when you click any element in this page that has a CSS class of required, is going to go ahead and fire off this function right here called highlight. And this function, the highlight function, does something Very, very simple. All it does is it changes the background color or whatever you click on to red. So now we're getting a little bit of behavior again. Actually, focus is part of the CSS standard, but it's another thing that's not universally done across browsers. But what this allows you to do now is add behavior so that when you actually move focus to an element, it does something. So let me show you how that works. So this page, again, has 2 text boxes. Only the first text box has that required attribute. So now if I tab into it or click into it, notice it turns red in the background. Just a little bit of behavior here, but we're working up to some more interesting things you can do with jQuery. OK, so let's look at one last sample. I want to show you a page that has a standard ASP.NET grid view control in it. So right here, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. So this has a standard ASP.NET grid view. It's just bound to a list of movies, right? It's just showing a list of movies in it. And what I want to do is I want to show you how you can use the even selector to change the appearance of every other row. So in my page load function, here I'm adding classes to do 2 different sets of elements. So every other row, I'm giving a nice orange background color by associating it with a CSS class that creates an orange background. Not a very nice looking color, but appropriate for Halloween. And then I'm also adding for the first row, for the header row, notice I'm using tr first. I'm grabbing out that row. I'm removing the orange background color by removing the banding class. And then I'm adding a new class for heading. This is a good example of using chaining in jQuery, because notice what I'm doing. In this case, I happen to be just retrieving one element, but I could retrieve a whole set of elements here and then do a series of operations by just calling different functions on that same initial set of elements that I grabbed. Okay, next thing I want to show you is how you can use jQuery animations. Now, jQuery supports 3 basic types of animations out of the box. You can display or hide elements. You can fade elements in or out. You can slide elements up and down, and that's it. So that's what you get in the basic package. Now, remember the philosophy behind jQuery. Keep everything really, really small. The goal is to keep a small footprint, but give you enough of the framework so you can start extending it with your own animations. So if you want fancier animations, if you've been working, like, for example, with the Microsoft Ajax Control Toolkit, that has a very rich animation framework in it. You can go that direction. The other thing you can do is jQuery has a separate library you can download by John Resig called the jQuery UI, and that has something like 50 other animations that you can start using. My favorite one is, I think it's called Explode 36. Where you can do this animation where any element will explode into 36 different pieces and go spreading across the screen. So there's a lot of fancy animation effects you can do just by adding the right plugin. So let me show you how you use an animation. Let me switch back to the laptop here. And I have a sample of a simple animation here. I'm going to go ahead and run this page first so you can see the animation, then I'll explain how I'm getting that to work in the background. So I have one link up here. It says Show Login. And I'm going to go ahead and click on this link. Everyone pay attention, because this goes kind of fast. Here we go. Pretty cool. So it just kind of slid right down, right? So if you didn't see that, let me do that one more time. There, in case you missed it the first time. OK, so that's a pretty simple animation effect. But the nice thing is this is all done in pure JavaScript. And it required only 1 line of code to do it. So I want to show you the 1 line of code that was required to get that to work. I'm going to go into the page, and you'll notice that there's a div tag. And what the div tag does, it just has 2 text boxes in it for the username and the password and the button for logging in. So nothing fancy there. And the other part of the page, if you scroll down, you'll see there is a link button. And there's nothing special about this link button at all. Notice it has an href that goes to default.aspx. That never happens. We're going to prevent that from happening. It's just, these are standard sort of, in this case, these aren't even ASP.NET controls. These are mainly HTML. Well, we have some text boxes inside of it. So we got that animation effect that you just saw by just adding up here in our page load you'll notice that I'm grabbing that link that I just showed you down the page, right? That has a pound selector, so it grabs that element with the right ID. And then I'm adding a click handler that calls the show login box function. And the show login box function is where all the animation happens. So that's this function right here. And the first statement is interesting. What this statement does is it prevents intrinsically what a link wants to do if you click on it, is that link really wants to go off and fetch another page right in the browser. That's what a link by its very nature wants to do. What the prevent default does is it prevents it from doing its default kind of intrinsic action. So what jQuery has done here is they've created a compatibility layer across events so you can handle that event in the same way across browsers. Now, one thing that I should emphasize here is you have a choice here, because this is also something that the Microsoft Ajax framework does a very good job of. You can use the Microsoft Ajax framework and it uses the exact same syntax. So you can handle events either using the jQuery syntax or you can use the Microsoft Ajax framework syntax for handling events. They both have a compatibility layer, and it's mainly just a matter of preference. So anyway, so this prevents when you click on the page, this prevents it for JavaScript-enabled browsers. This prevents the page from now posting back to the server. And finally, my favorite part here, this is all you have to do to create the animation effect. You just call slide down, that's it. What can be easier? You call slide down and it just does the animation, the slide down animation on that div tag that I showed you just a moment ago on the page. Really, really simple. Notice that you can pass in slow, normal, or fast if you want to control the speed of the animation. If you really, really want to control it down to the millisecond, you can also do that by passing in a certain integer value. So if you want that animation to happen at a speed of 223 milliseconds, you can do it. You can control the animation down to that level. Okay. So last feature of jQuery that I want to show you before we get to the sample applications. Last thing I want to show you is the plugins. And this is fun. If you ever have a free afternoon, go to there's the website right there. Go to plugins.jquery.com and just browse them, because there's all sorts of really cool things you can do. They have carousel plugins. So if you want to make images go in like a merry-go-round carousel, you can do that. They have some really interesting ones. They have a plugin that allows you to use link syntax, .NET link syntax on the client side, which is kind of interesting. You can do it in pure JavaScript. I want to show you one sample of a plugin, because one of the nice things about using jQuery is it's very easy to pull one of these plugins into your project and then start using in jQuery. So I want to give you a demonstration of that. I'm going to show you something called the table sorter plugin. And what the table sorter plugin does is it automatically adds support for sorting on any HTML table. So you can take any HTML table at all, use the table sorter plugin, and then automatically you can start sorting the different columns in the table. So in this page, I have a standard list view control. This is an ASP.NET list view control, a web form control. Nothing fancy there. It's just rendering out an HTML table. I have that. It's bound to a SQL data source. I want to make this into a sortable. I want to make it into a sortable table. So what I did up here is first, I needed to download the table sorter plugin, and you can download it from conveniently enough. They have the domain tablesorter.com, so it's easy to remember. Go to tablesorter.com and you download it, and it's also released under both the MIT and GPL licenses, so under the same licenses as the rest of the jQuery framework. So you can download this thing, and once you have it, if you want to start using it in your application, you can just add another script reference, the same way as you added a script reference to jQuery. Just add a second script reference now to the table sorter. Here's the one to the minified version. And now you can start using it. That's all you have to do. And you'll notice in my page load that what I'm doing is I'm just grabbing all of the tables in this document. So this grabs all the table tags, and then I'm calling table sorter on it. That's all I have to do. And now all those tables become sortable. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to click on date released. Notice it sorts by that. This is all client-side sorting, right? kind of works like you expect it to. The nice thing about table sorter is it's smart enough, it knows about the different data types, so it knows how to sort differently depending if you're working with a date-time column versus if you're working with integer column or you're working with a string column. You can even do multiple, you can sort on multiple columns at once if you want to. You can shift select multiple columns and sort by them. So it's a really cool little control. You can have it default sort, so when the table first opens, it's sorted in a certain way. That took one line of code, right? Once you've downloaded the plugin, you just call it like any other jQuery method and start using it. All right, so now we get to the demos. So first thing I want to show you is I want to show you a demonstration of using jQuery to create a basic photo gallery application. This is going to be, of course, an AJAX-enabled photo gallery application. That's kind of the point of the talk. So the basic way I want it to work is I want to show a list of photo categories, and then when you click on a photo category, I want to do an AJAX call back to the server, grab matching photos, and then display it. Now, the nice thing about this demo is I'm going to show off, how to use jQuery, but I'm also going to show off some of the new things that you get in Microsoft AJAX, like client templates. I'm going to show how you can actually format the stuff you get back by using client templates. All right, so I'm going to build this application incrementally because I want you to see how all the different parts of the two frameworks work together to enable you to build an AJAX application. So let me switch back. So I want to start from the very basics here. On this page, all I'm doing is I'm using a list view control. This is just a standard ASP.NET list view control. I'm just binding it to a SQL data source to show a list of photo categories. So this is all happening now on the server side, right? It's going out of the server, grabbing the data and showing it. The only kind of special thing here is notice I'm sneaking in the category ID from the database in an expando attribute I'm putting on each link so that each link knows what category ID should be associated with it. Nothing fancy here. Let me go ahead and run it. And we get a simple list of categories. All right, so let's start adding some AJAX functionality onto this thing. First thing I need to do if I want to start adding AJAX functionality is I need to add a script manager control to the page. And this is the same thing that we did before in a web forms application. If I want to start using both ASP.NET AJAX and jQuery, I need to make sure I have the script manager there, and I need to make sure I've added a reference to jQuery so I can start doing stuff. So I've added that in. And now I'm ready to start grabbing, now I'm ready to start adding some JavaScript functionality to the page. So here's a third version of the page. Let me go ahead and run it first, and then I'll show you the code that I added to run it. So here's the list of photo categories again. And now what I'm going to do is, if I click on the photo category, notice this is very simple styling here, but notice as I click on each category, it's highlighting it. So some simple JavaScript here. But I want to show you how I got that to work using jQuery, because it took I think it took 3 lines of code. We'll see in a second. And what I'm doing here is I'm in the page load function. I'm using jQuery to grab all of the links inside the categories bulleted list. So that grabs all the A tags from the categories bulleted list. I'm adding a click handler to each link so that when you click on any of the links, it fires off the select category function. So in the select category function, what I'm doing is first I'm preventing the default action associated with clicking on the link from happening. So I'm preventing the page from posting back to the server. And then I can go ahead and I can deselect any currently highlighted links by notice I'm grabbing all of the links that have a selected category CSS class associated with it. And then I'm adding a selected category CSS class to the current one that you clicked on. So nothing really fancy so far, but if you haven't done a lot of JavaScript, this simplifies the amount of JavaScript you have to write for this kind of simple scenario. All right, so next step is we actually want to add some AJAX functionality. We want it to be the case that when you click on a link, that it will go back to the server and that will grab the list of photos and show the photos. So let's look at the next version of the page. Next version of the page, let me run it first so you can see what it does, and then I'll show you how it does what it does. So here's our list of categories. And now if I click on the categories, let me click on kittens, we actually get photos of kittens. So it's going back to the server, is grabbing the, the list of, in this case, the list of database items, the list of database items that represents the photos, and it's displaying them. If I click on robots, it's showing the robots. Now notice there's no post-back happening here because everything's happening in the background. It's all happening with AJAX calls in the background. So how is that possible? Well, so to make that work, one thing I did was, first I had to create a WCF service. So I have a photo service here. And you'll notice that the photo service is contained in a namespace called photo services. It's in a class called photo service, and it has a method called get photos. And all the get photos method does is it just goes off to the database and gets a list of photos from a database that match the category that's passed over to it. So that's how, that's what's happening on the server side to get the photos back. On the client side, if we go back to the page, you'll notice that what I'm doing is I've added this additional line of code. Well, actually, before I show you that, let me show you how I got the service in there. If you've been working with the Microsoft AJAX library, then you're used to working with this. But notice I've added a service reference to my photo service that I just showed you. So that allows me to start using that, generate a proxy now for that service. I can start using my JavaScript code so I can call out to it. So that gives me a way to start communicating with the photo service. And once I have that proxy, all I have to do to invoke that the photo service on the web server is call this line right here. So this is the name of the namespace I just showed you, the name of the class of the WCF service, and then finally the method that I called, the method that I defined on the WCF service. So it's it's mirrored on the client side. So I can call it here, invoke it from the client side. Notice I'm passing the current category ID. I'm using jQuery to get the category ID out. And when the service finishes, if it successfully returns something, then I have it call this get photos complete function right here. So when it's gone out, it's grabbed the list of photos, it's pulled them back on the client side, and now we're ready to do something with it. Get photos complete method is called. Get photos complete is defined right here. And what this function does is I'm using a string builder. This is from the Microsoft AJAX library. This is a client-side string builder class. And using the string builder, I'm using the jQuery each method that allows me to call a function for each element that I'm getting. So I'm passing over the database data. And for each item in the database data, I'm appending using the string builder an image. And then once I'm all done, I can go ahead and just append that string that I've built up with the string builder. I can just go ahead and stuff it into a div tag that I have in the page. So that's how I'm showing the photos. So I'm using a string builder here, building up a string, and then showing it. Not a lot of code, really, to be able to go out to the server and grab the data. Okay. But you know what? It would be nice if there was a way to provide better formatting for this code. I mean, the way it's displayed right now, I'm just showing a bunch of photos, right? They're just kind of scrunched together on the page. It'd be nice if I could show like the title of each photo and maybe a description or the author, if I had some way to lay out the appearance of each photo in the page. Now this is where the new client template functionality in Microsoft AJAX comes in handy. Because using the new client template functionality, what I can do is define a template in the page and use that to format each of the photo data items I'm getting back from the service and then make a nicer display of the photos. So let me show you how to use this client template stuff. So let me run the page first so you see what it looks like. Okay, so now if I click on robots, I get a little more formatting here. Notice that I'm actually getting, I'm getting a box around it. I'm getting a title down here. Now I can go ahead and format this however I want, and I get some more layout possibilities. How am I able to do that? Well, I'm taking advantage of client templates. I'm also taking advantage of the new data view control that you get in the Microsoft AJAX framework. So let me show you how that works. So there was some really, well, before I get to the really ugly code, actually, no, I'll show the really ugly. So just a moment ago, I used a string builder, right, to be able to build up that list of photos. I felt kind of bad about that because all that concatenating and all that, it just is a messy way to be able to display information. What I'm able to do is I'm able to replace that code that I showed in the previous page with this one line of code right here. And what this one line of code does is it takes the photo data being returned by the WCF service, and it uses this photo view client-side control to be able to display all of that data. And the photo view control, which is defined right here in page load, so I can create the photo view control by using standard Microsoft Ajax, the standard Microsoft Ajax create syntax to go ahead and create it. What I'm doing is I'm grabbing a DOM element and converting that into a client-side data view control. And the data view control, what it allows you to do is use a template. So here's the client-side template. Whoops, I missed. Right here. Now, this is the new addition to the Microsoft Ajax framework that I'm most excited about. Because notice that this is just a fragment of HTML sitting there in the page. But notice that it has these little parameters right here. So it has these parameters where you can replace the parameters from the data items. So each of those data items I'm getting back from the service, each photo class has a title on it, it has a URL on it, and that's automatically going to replace that right into that template. So I can use this template now to be able to format the appearance of each of the photos I'm getting back from the server, and this gives me a much cleaner way to be able to display stuff. I mean, it's the difference between, in a web form page, using a repeater control or concatenating a bunch of strings together and response writing it out. You wouldn't want to concatenate strings together, you'd want to use a repeater control, and this gives you the same kind of functionality now on the client side. Okay. One last example using this. I want to show you an example of using a plugin with this photo gallery application. So I downloaded a Lightbox plugin. Let me show you how it works. So I'm going to go ahead and click on kittens again. And there I get all my standard photos of kittens. But I downloaded this plugin, and by just calling one line of code, now if I click on any of the photos, notice, I'm not sure how well that translated up there on the screen, but notice it faded out the background, and it gave us a nice little light box around the one image. And this plugin, jQuery plugin, it has these menu items here. You click on auto, it's going to automatically step through the photos one by one. There we go. So we can see each of the kittens. Or if you prefer, I can go ahead and stop this. I can manually go ahead and move to the previous photo and to the next photo. So this is nice. All I had to do to get this plugin to work is I had to add one more script reference. Right? It's another download. I got this from the jQuery repository. So I downloaded something called jQuery Lightbox. Added a script reference right here. And once I had the script reference, all I had to do to start using the Lightbox, you'll notice that now there's one more line of code right here where I call Lightbox on my photo container. So that gave me all that functionality, the fading background, the auto moving, just calling that one method. So that's just insanely easy, right? It's just an insanely easy way to add, some rich UI onto a web application by taking advantage of a plugin in that way. Okay, so what did we learn? What did we learn by creating that photo gallery application? Well, what we saw is we had to use elements of both Microsoft Ajax and jQuery together to get all that functionality. We used a number of features of jQuery. Obviously, we used selectors. We used event handlers. We used animation. We had the fade in, fade out in the background of the animation. And we used that Lightbox plugin. So that's what jQuery brought to this application. We also used a number of features of ASP NET Ajax. So we used Ajax request against the WCF service. That's how we were able to get the data back from the server, the list of photos. We used client templates. That's how we were able to lay out each of the photos in such a nice manner. And then we used, a client-side control. We used the data view control, and finally we used a string builder before we replaced it with the client template. So we had to use both frameworks to be able to build this AJAX application. So I want to show you one more AJAX application. This time I want to show you an MVC application. Oops, I'm moving the wrong way. Go. This time I want to show you an MVC application. I want to show this for you for two reasons. First, jQuery is already shipping an MVC, so it's interesting actually seeing how it integrates into MVC because there's a different way of actually getting it to work in it. But the other reason is a lot of the times when I show like demonstrations using AJAX, one response that you always get is, well, what if people have JavaScript turned off, or how does it work on down-level browsers, or how do search engines are basically down-level browsers, right? How can a search engine then index my pages if I'm using all this fancy JavaScript in it? So I want to show you a sample application that uses client-side AJAX, so to give you a better user experience, but can also fall back to doing server-side stuff if someone's using a lame browser to get to your website, or if someone's using or if a search engine is searching your website, or someone's using, or for accessibility reasons, you want to expose out your website to screen readers. You want to make sure it's an accessible website. I want to show you how you can create a website that will fall back to being generated on the server. Okay, so let me switch back. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a simple movie database application. So the idea here is, this is I couldn't build a huge application here. So I wanted to build an application where you have a drop-down list where you can select out movie categories. And after you select a movie category, I want to show matching movies in the page. I'm going to show a grid of matching movies. But I wanted to do it by using some AJAX to give people a better experience. So let's start with, this is an MVC application. So I'm going to start by showing you the controller. Actually, even before I show you the controller, let me run it once so you have some context for what this thing does. So here's my movie application. This is the non-AJAX version. This is just server-side. And notice I'm sticking the time up here. The reason I'm showing the time on the page is I want to show you that without AJAX, every time I pick a new movie, it's going to have to do a post back to the server, reload all the movie categories again, reload all the movies again, and rebuild the entire page. So let's say I want to select a category here. I'm going to go ahead and select drama and click select. Notice it posts back to the server, and this time right here is now different, right? I mean, each and every time I select a new category, it has to go back, has to get the list of all the categories again from the database, and then it has to go out and get the matching movies. Very simple application, but it's a pretty typical application that you might need to write. So how did I write the non-AJAX version? Well, I started by creating a controller, and the controller has two methods inside of it. It has an index method that's called initially when you go to the application. And inside of this index method, what I'm doing is I'm pulling out both the categories and I'm pulling out the movies from the database, and I'm adding them to view data, right? When you're building an MVC application, you always use view data as a container to pass information from a controller into a view. I'm grabbing both sets of data out, sticking it into view data, and then passing it over to the view so it can be displayed in the view. So that's one method. Then when you click that select button, when you're actually selecting a category, is calling the second controller action down here. And what this controller action is doing is it's actually getting the form collection out. It's extracting the category ID that the person selected, and then getting matching categories from the database. But you'll notice that it also it's getting both the matching categories and the matching movies. So it has to go out and get both the categories and the movies again when it re-renders the page. So it has to do all the work that the index method does. It has to do the two database calls. All right, so that's the non-AJAX version of the page. I want to make this application better by adding AJAX functionality into it. So let me show you the AJAX-enabled version of my movie application. So I'm going to go to Home Ajax, and that's going to execute the Home Ajax controller. This page looks exactly the same as the previous one. If I go up here, notice the time. It says it is 6:13, so I have 2 minutes to finish this talk. But I have it's 6:13 right now. And what I want to show you, though, is because we're now using the Ajax version of this application, this time's not going to change. Because now I can just update the region of the page I need to update. So let me show you that. I'm going to select a new category. I'm going to pick drama, and there we go. Now notice that it still says it's 6:13. It still says it's 13 minutes after 6. The reason for that is, this part of the page wasn't updated at all. The only part of the page that was updated is the grid view down here. So let me do that one more time because that animation is so much fun. There we go. So notice as soon as I select a new category, it's going to go ahead and go to the server and update the list of categories. All right, so how was I able to do that? Well, actually, before I show you how to do that, let's imagine that I've turned off JavaScript on my browser. So none of this JavaScript stuff's going to work. This application will still work perfectly well, because if JavaScript's turned off on my browser, I can just click Select. It's going to do a full page post back, and then it's going to render out all the categories of movies. So it works for both down-level and up-level browsers, works for search engines, works for, it has a built-in accessibility story because it can generate the server-side stuff. For people who are using good browsers, they get the full, rich, interactive Ajax experience. They get a faster page, all that good stuff. For people who are using down-level browsers, they don't. So how was I able to implement that? So if you look at my Home Ajax controller, it still has the same two methods that the other controller had. So it still has this index method and the index no JavaScript. There's no changes in here at all. But it has one more method that the previous version of the controller didn't have. It has a new movies method, this guy right here. And the movies method, you'll notice that instead of retrieving both the movies and the categories out of the database, now it only has to retrieve the movies. And notice the return type of this method. It's returning a JSON action result. So it's passing the data back as pure JSON from the controller action. So it's passing that data back to the client side in a very compact form. It's not passing the TR, the TDs, any of that stuff in the grid. It's just passing JSON data back. So extremely efficient way to update the page. So what did we learn from this application? So in this application, we also had to use both jQuery and ASP.NET Ajax. I used jQuery to do the Ajax request against the controller action. I also used jQuery for that little bit of animation in the page. But I also used a lot of ASP.NET Ajax in this application. For example, again, I used client templates. That's how I created the grid view. I created a template for each row. So that's how I rendered out all the rows in the grid view. And finally, I used the data view control to be able to display that. So the conclusion of this talk, I had 2 points that I wanted to, that I wanted to push in this talk. The 2 points were that you need to use both jQuery and ASP.NET Ajax together to build, these kind of rich client-side ASP.NET Ajax applications. The other point I want to make sure everyone understands this is jQuery is now fully supported by Microsoft. So that means that you should go out there, start using jQuery in your applications just like any other feature of the ASP.NET framework. Start using it in your web forms applications and start using it in your MVC applications. If you want to learn more about any of this stuff, go to the official ASP.NET website. There's an Ajax section on it. It has all these videos and tutorials on Ajax. I have a blog at stephenwalther.com. That's a good place to get information, particularly on MVC stuff. And then finally, Bertrand, who's the program manager for Ajax, is giving a talk. I already mentioned the talk on Thursday. Make sure you go to his talk if you want to learn the details of how this client template stuff works. But he also has a blog at weblogsasp.net at that address up there. So that's where you can get sort of the latest information on ASP.NET Ajax. And please make sure that, I don't have the slide for that, please make sure that you fill out your evaluations, and this will be available after the conference, a recorded version in 24 hours will be posted up on the web. Thanks very much. Or actually, no, he's turning on the microphone again. If you have questions, please feel free to go to the microphone and ask any questions that you might have.
Hi, could you pop up the JavaScript for the last demo?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
We ran out of time for that, but if you could just show us.
Absolutely. That's not right. Was there a particular part of the JavaScript you wanted to see? Oh, the animation part. Yeah, so interesting thing about the animation part is notice I'm passing a second parameter, and that will call that method after it finishes executing the animation, because I wanted to make sure it had a chance to slide up before it invokes the server-side action and updates the view. All this code is going to be up. I'm going to post it on my website so you can download the code in the PowerPoint presentation. If you go to stephenwalther.com, which I showed on the previous slide, if you go to that website, I'll put the code up. You can download and experiment with it.
Hi, there's a question.
Yes.
There was a concern previously that you have to use Ajax toolkit, and Microsoft was pushing for it because of the security concerns, such as I don't know, cross-site scripting or injection attacks, which are possible by jQuery. So, are those concerns still in place, or we can just start using jQuery regardless of that?
Did you have a specific example of a cross-site scripting attack?
There was a blog post that why Microsoft was saying that to use Ajax framework was because it has scrubbing capabilities, which would not allow having cross-site scripting attacks and things like that.
What was the blog? I'm not familiar with the blog post, but
okay.
Do you have like a link for it?
No,
or do you know,
I don't. But is it perfectly fine?
Realize you can always misuse any JavaScript framework out there, right? I mean, you can always, if you don't write the JavaScript in the right way and you take content, anytime you take user-submitted content and you redisplay it, you're opening yourself up for the possibility of a cross-site scripting attack. I'm not aware of the issue you're talking about, so there might be some specific issue with jQuery.
I think Microsoft Ajax, like they scrub JSON. Like
yes. Yeah. jQuery does the same thing? Okay.
So Jeff King says that jQuery does the same thing as Microsoft Ajax. So, so I'm quoting Jeff King.
Thank you.
Okay. I had a question. So when you use the jQuery ID selector, that when you do the pound sign and use that, how does that work with the client ID when I embed certain elements within controls and put them?
That's a great question. So you're saying that the problem is that oftentimes when you're working with ASP.NET, you don't have control over the client ID, right? Because that's being generated on the server side. Well, there's two possible responses to that. First off, you can use, every control has a client ID property, so you can actually inject that into your JavaScript code by putting a little bracket %, the control ID, and then client ID, and that'll push out that ID so you can refer to it. The other thing is, if you went to the keynote this morning, one of the new features that they're adding into the ASP.NET framework is ability so that you can actually control your client ID. So the next version of ASP.NET is going to have much better IDs. Actually, I have a third response too. Third response is don't use IDs, just use classes. I mean, it's not from a theoretical sort of philosophical way of doing it, it's not so great to use classes instead of IDs, but it'll work. It's an easy workaround to just apply a class rather than an ID, because you know that the ASP.NET framework isn't going to alter the class on you.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
I just had one other question, which is regarding client-side binding. So we often run into a situation where client-side binding is great, but some situations where we really would like to get like a server-side thing to come back. Maybe you call a web service, you bring back a HTML fragment, and you want to put that inside. Is there anything in the works that enables you to do that kind of stuff? Or?
Well, if you should go back. So you should see, is this for an MVC application or a web forms application?
It's a web forms application.
Oh, web forms. I was going to say in the MVC demo that Phil Hack gave yesterday, he gave a demo of you passing partial views over onto the client and then updating the page. But there's a number of different ways you can do that. If you're the type of scenario you're describing sounds like a great scenario for using the update panel. That's like the easiest way of doing that. Just use an update panel in a page, and then that will hijack any of the any control inside the update panel that causes a postback, and then it'll do an asynchronous postback instead, so you can grab fragments of HTML out. That's a really great option because it doesn't require you to write any JavaScript. There's other methods of doing that. You can also, if you really want to write some JavaScript to do it, to make your life more difficult, you can do that by using the Microsoft Ajax framework. It's called the Web Request class. Is that right? The you could what? Yeah. Oh, you just. So Birch, yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay.
So let me repeat that for the microphone and for people. So Bertrand is saying that Scott Guthrie has a really great post which demonstrates how to do what you're describing using a web service.
That's great because I read that post and that's kind of where we started from. That works great as long as the HTML fragment doesn't have any scripting within it.
Yeah, well, scripting adds extra issues inside of it.
Right.
So
Okay.
you might want to also, so jQuery has a load method in it. It has a, so you could also use that as another option. And does jQuery take care of the script issue? Does it well, no, actually reinvigorating the script again after it's pulled.
Depends on what you're doing. If you do a load, it will.
Oh, it will. Okay. So I'm asking Rick Strahl, who knows everything about jQuery, I'm asking him about, he's saying that the load, he thinks the load method, if you use jQuery.load.
You just can't do it in the same call. You have to basically load and put it into a separate, it has to be a separate.
Okay. Okay, cool. So is there any demos for that anywhere? On, say, your blog or?
No, I don't have anything. But I know it works that way.
Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you know how much redundancy there is between the jQuery and the Ajax.NET libraries?
Well, there's,
like you say, there's some animation in both, but and I guess also along with that, how did you guys choose to go with jQuery rather than, you know, there's a multitude of them out there, like Prototype, EXTJS. I realize jQuery is pretty small and slim, and probably was just the extensions that you needed, I assume, that did kind of cool things that you didn't have. But I'm just curious, you know, why did Microsoft decide to support jQuery and not support Prototype, MooTools, EXTJS, you know, these other types? Thanks.
I guess you pretty much gave the answer to that, actually. So jQuery is small, which was one factor in choosing it, and it has relatively little overlap with Microsoft Ajax. It has the selectors that we needed and wanted the most. It does have some Ajax, so if you do $.ajax, you get those ways to go back into the server, which are redundant with what we are doing. But it is really a very small part of jQuery. And if you look at the other libraries, they are doing a lot more things that we are also doing. So jQuery was kind of a natural fit for us. That was, and it's pretty popular with ASP.NET developers, which that didn't hurt at all. I mean. So the question is performance in IE versus other browsers. Performance of what? Of
jQuery in general, I guess. We've developed an app recently which does a lot of update panel calls, essentially. And we found that IE is several times slower in the rendering of large chunks of HTML and then processing any script tags inside of there. Right? Essentially using it like kind of an iframe in the sense that we have a large single page that runs our entire application. Giant MDI app, which, you know, we piece in parts of JavaScript as necessary, depending on, say, which tab you're on. The functionality for that application would just be a large block of HTML and JavaScript that's put within inside the DOM for that specific part of the application. Kind of hard to explain, but essentially we ran across the problem where in every browser but IE, we could place large amounts of HTML and JavaScript in the DOM. And it seemed like some actions we were doing with, this has to be EXT toolkit, but I imagine some toolkits are the same, is saying like your .inner HTML or .html and you pass a large chunk, right? It's many times slower.
Yeah. So as I said earlier in response to one question before that, update panel is actually doing a lot more than just doing .html, .inner HTML equals, which explains why in some situations it doesn't scale so well.
Right.
And in those situations, you really have two choices. You can re-architect the way you're building the page so that it actually uses smaller chunks, more atomic pieces, or you can go for a lighter weight approach if that's enough for what you're doing. Update panel really handles, all the edge cases, all the weird stuff that can happen, because we're actually, the main goal of update panel is that if you remove the update panel from the page, chances are your page will run exactly the same.
Right.
And getting to that result is actually quite complex, and it comes with some overhead that you may see in some of those situations.
Okay.
So it is perfectly legitimate to go for an alternate approach in these cases. That's perfectly fine, but in general, if you have this kind of application, I would really advise that you look at going for a pure AJAX approach where you do more rendering on the client, which will scale much better usually.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we found. Thanks.